Welcome to today's documentary-style exploration of three of the world's most important ancient fruits: grapes, apples, and dates. For thousands of years, these fruits shaped economies, influenced settlement patterns, and helped build some of the earliest agricultural systems on Earth. In this video, we'll take you through 12 chapters, covering each fruit's origins, cultivation, harvesting techniques, storage methods, and cultural and economic importance across ancient civilizations. Let us begin our journey with the grape, one of the earliest fruits ever domesticated by humans. Three ancient fruits, a journey through their origins, cultivation, and timeless gifts. A gentle historical story long before cities rose toward the sky. Long before maps were drawn, human hands tended three fruits that shaped civilizations: the grape, the apple, and the date. Their vines, branches, and palms became part of the world's earliest gardens, feeding both body and imagination. Discover the ancient origins and agricultural history of grapes, apples, and dates. Three fruits that shaped early civilizations. From the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, the cool orchards of Central Asia, to the sunlit oases of Arabia, these fruits became vital to human survival, trade, and culture. Learn how early farmers cultivated grapevines on rocky hillsides, grafted apples into reliable orchard varieties, and mastered oasis agriculture to grow date palms in the desert. Explore how each fruit was harvested, preserved, and transformed into essential byproducts: wine, raisins, apple cider, vinegar, dried apples, date syrup, date wine, palm flour, and more. This journey reveals why grapes were called the fruit of civilization, apples the orchard keeper's jewel, and dates the desert's sweet treasure, and how their timeless gifts nourished ancient societies across thousands of years. The ancient origins of the grape and early human. The grape is one of the earliest fruits ever cultivated by human societies, with a history stretching back more than 8,000 years. Archaeological, botanical, and genetic studies all point to a specific region as the cradle of grape domestication: the area between the Caucasus Mountains, eastern Turkey, northern Iran, and the fertile valleys of ancient Mesopotamia. In this zone, wild grapes known scientifically as Vitis vinifera sylvestris flourished. Their vines climbed trees, sprawled across riverbanks, and produced clusters that early hunter-gatherers began to harvest long before agriculture was fully established. The transition from simply gathering wild grapes to cultivating them marks an important development in early human farming. Seeds found in ancient settlements, such as those in Georgia and Armenia, show deliberate selection. Humans chose vines with larger berries, more consistent ripening, and stable flavor. By around 6,000 to 5,000 BCE, evidence from pottery jars in the South Caucasus indicates the earliest grape fermentation, strongly suggesting that people were not only consuming grapes fresh, but also experimenting with storing their juice. Although the earliest purpose may not have been recreational drinking, the transformation of grape juice through natural fermentation would become a turning point in agricultural history. Early grape cultivation required an understanding of the plant's basic needs. Grapevines thrive in sunny, dry climates with well-drained soils conditions, common in the regions where early civilizations emerged. Farmers quickly noticed that vines performed better when supported. This led to simple trellising systems. Wooden stakes, branches, or stone walls were used to lift the growing vine off the ground, increasing exposure to sunlight and airflow. While pruning as a scientific practice developed much later, early farmers learned through experience that removing excess growth improved fruit production. These early techniques became the foundation of viticulture. Grapes played a functional and economic role long before they became culturally symbolic. Fresh grapes were nutritious but perishable, which encouraged people to seek ways to preserve them. Drying them in the sun created raisins, a lightweight, long-lasting food that could be stored or transported easily, ideal for travelers, traders, and armies. The juice, once naturally fermented, proved safer to drink than contaminated water sources. Even before the cultural importance of wine developed, its ability to store calories and prevent spoilage made it valuable. This practical importance likely accelerated the spread of grape cultivation. By the 4th millennium BCE, grapevines and the knowledge of their care had spread southward into Mesopotamia. The Sumerians recorded grapes and wine in administrative tablets, demonstrating that vineyards were recognized as economic assets. However, the hot and low-lying climate of southern Mesopotamia was not ideal for growing vines. As a result, grapes became an imported or elite product. The more suitable northern regions of Syria, northern Mesopotamia, and the Zagros foothills developed some of the earliest large-scale vineyards. These areas supplied grapes and wine to cities farther south, creating one of history's earliest long-distance agricultural trade networks. At the same time, grape cultivation spread westward into the Levant. Archaeological remains from Bronze Age Canaanite cities show grape seeds, wine residues, and large storage jars, indicating an organized industry. Canaanite merchants transported wine across the Mediterranean and Amphorae, making it a key commodity in international trade. The importance of grapes and grape products grew steadily as more cultures adopted similar cultivation methods. The domestication of grapes also influenced settlement patterns. Vineyards required stable, long-term maintenance, which encouraged communities to remain in one place. This permanence helped shape early village layouts. Terrace hillsides common in regions with limited flat farmland became vineyard sites, as they provided better drainage and higher sun exposure. The construction of terraces and irrigation structures reflects the increasing sophistication of early grape farmers. Genetic studies show that as grapevines spread across ancient trade routes, they hybridized with local wild vines. This process created new varieties naturally. By the time grape cultivation reached Egypt, Greece, and Iran, numerous distinct grape types were already in existence, each adapted to local climate conditions. This diversity helped ensure the fruit's survival and continued expansion. In Egypt, grapes were cultivated as early as 3000 BCE. Though on a smaller scale, compared to grains and figs, tomb paintings depict trellised vineyards with workers pruning, harvesting, and stomping grapes. The Egyptians recognized the need for careful maintenance, including watering, supporting the vines, and protecting them from pests. Vineyards were often enclosed to prevent animal intrusion, indicating their value. Meanwhile, in the ancient Iranian plateau, grape cultivation thrived due to ideal climatic conditions. Persian farmers improved irrigation systems and developed some of the earliest documented vineyard management techniques. Their methods influenced neighboring regions and contributed to the spread of viticulture throughout Asia. By the 2nd millennium BCE, grapes had become firmly established as a significant agricultural product in several civilizations. Their cultivation represented a combination of practical farming knowledge, environmental adaptation, and evolving cultural importance. From wild vines clinging to riverbanks to carefully tended vineyards on terraced slopes, the grape's journey mirrors the progress of early human agriculture itself. Ancient viticulture, techniques, tools, and farming practices. The expansion of grape cultivation across the ancient world led to the development of increasingly sophisticated farming techniques. As societies learned more about the grapevine's behavior, they refined methods to improve yield, quality, and consistency. Chapter 2 explores the viticulture practices used by early civilizations, focusing on how they cultivated, maintained, and expanded vineyards in different environments. Once grapes became an agricultural staple, farmers recognized that success depended on careful land preparation. Most ancient vineyards were established on slopes or elevated terrain. These areas provided natural drainage, preventing water from accumulating around the roots, an issue that could damage or kill vines. In regions with heavy rainfall or river-based agriculture, such as the Levant and northern Mesopotamia, farmers constructed stone terraces to stabilize sloped ground. These terraces prevented soil erosion and created flat planting surfaces. Archaeological remains of such terraces still survive in places like modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan. Soil choice was equally important. Ancient farmers learned through observation that grapevines produced better fruit in poor, rockier soils. Soil that was too fertile encouraged excessive leaf growth at the expense of fruit production. Consequently, many early vineyards were planted in marginal lands that were unsuitable for other crops. This practical decision helped civilizations maximize their agricultural productivity by keeping more fertile soils available for grains and vegetables. One of the foundational skills in ancient viticulture was vine training. Grapevines are naturally climbing plants. Without guidance, They sprawl across the ground or climb nearby trees. To control the plant and improve fruit quality, early farmers used basic training systems. The simplest method involved planting vines near wooden stakes. As the vine grew, farmers tied shoots to the stake to lift the fruit clusters off the soil. This reduced rot, improved airflow, and made harvesting easier. In regions with abundant reeds or branches, farmers created horizontal trellises. These structures allowed vines to spread more widely, increasing the number of fruit-bearing shoots. The trellis method was well documented in ancient Egypt, where tomb paintings depict workers tying vines along wooden frameworks. The Greeks and Romans later expanded on these concepts, developing more complex systems that shaped Western vineyard layout for centuries. Ancient farmers also understood the importance of pruning, even if the science behind it was not formally documented. Pruning involved cutting back unnecessary shoots to direct the plant's energy into producing better fruit. Seasonal pruning became a normal vineyard task, usually performed during winter or early spring. Some cultures performed severe pruning to limit the number of grape clusters and improve concentration of flavor. Others preferred lighter pruning to increase yields, especially when grapes were grown for drying into raisins. Water management played different roles depending on climate. In the arid environments of Mesopotamia and Egypt, irrigation was essential. Vineyards were often planted near canals or river-fed basins to ensure a steady water supply. Farmers dug channels to deliver controlled amounts of water to the roots. Too much water produced weak vines, so irrigation systems were managed carefully. In contrast, Mediterranean regions relied primarily on seasonal rainfall. Their dry summers actually benefited grape quality by concentrating sugars in the fruit. Another significant development was the early understanding of grapevine reproduction. Wild vines produce male and female flowers on separate plants, while domesticated grapes evolved to produce perfect flowers containing both reproductive parts. This made pollination easier and more reliable. Early domestication favored vines with perfect flowers, leading to higher yields. Farmers occasionally propagated vines from cuttings, a simple yet effective method that allowed them to reproduce desirable varieties. Evidence of this practice appears in ancient Near Eastern texts, and later in Greek and Roman agricultural writings. Vineyard maintenance also included controlling pests and diseases. Although ancient farmers lacked modern knowledge about pathogens, they identified patterns of damage and adapted solutions. For example, vines were often planted with sufficient spacing to promote airflow, reducing fungal growth. Some cultures used ash or sand to deter insects around the base of vines. Birds posed a significant threat to ripening grapes, and so farmers constructed simple nets or used scare tactics. Reflective objects or elevated watch platforms where workers guarded vineyards during critical weeks. Seasonal labor was essential in ancient viticulture. Each stage of the vine's growth required attention. Tying shoots, pruning, irrigating, cleaning terraces, and monitoring fruit clusters. Large estates employed full-time vineyard workers, while smaller family vineyards relied on shared community labor. Vineyard work also aligned with the agricultural calendar. After winter pruning, spring required shoot training and weed removal. Summer demanded careful monitoring of ripening clusters. By late summer or early autumn, depending on region and climate, farmers prepared for harvest. One interesting aspect of ancient viticulture was the diversity of grape varieties. As vines spread across regions, they adapted to local conditions and crossbred with wild relatives. While ancient farmers did not classify grapes scientifically, they recognized differences in flavor, color, ripening time, and suitability for wine, raisins, or fresh consumption. Certain regions became known for specific grape types, such as the high-quality varieties grown in the Levant and the Zagros foothills. These early distinctions later influenced trade and cultural preferences. By the time viticulture practices spread to Greece and eventually Rome, the techniques developed by earlier civilizations formed the foundation of a highly organized industry. However, even in its early stages, grape farming was a sophisticated agricultural craft requiring patience, observation, and knowledge accumulated across generations. These early practices ensured that grapes became one of the most enduring and widely cultivated fruits in human history. Harvesting, processing, and storage of grapes. In ancient societies, harvesting grapes was one of the most carefully managed tasks. In the agricultural calendar of early civilizations, it required skilled timing, coordinated labor, and a variety of processing methods, depending on whether the fruit was intended for fresh consumption, drying, or fermentation. Chapter 3 examines how ancient societies approached harvesting, processing, and storing grapes, highlighting the techniques that shaped early agricultural economies. The grape harvest began with a fundamental decision, determining the right moment to pick the fruit. Ancient farmers relied on practical observations, color change, sweetness, firmness, and ease of detachment from the stem. While they had no instruments to measure sugar levels, generations of experience gave them a reliable sense of readiness. The timing of the harvest varied significantly across regions. In hotter climates, such as Egypt and lower Mesopotamia, the harvest tended to occur earlier, sometimes as early as July. In cooler regions, including the Levant, Anatolia, and later Greece, harvesting took place from late August into September. The harvest was usually a communal activity. Families, hired laborers, and sometimes entire villages participated. Workers moved through the rows with baskets or clay containers, cutting grape clusters with simple knives or snapping them by hand. Care was taken to avoid crushing the fruit prematurely, which could lead to unwanted fermentation or in some societies, harvest rituals developed over time. Though, in the earliest agricultural periods, the focus was strictly practical, gathering the crop efficiently before it over-ripened or became vulnerable to animals, birds, or weather. Once grapes were harvested, they were sorted according to their intended use. Fresh table grapes were separated from grapes destined for processing. This sorting often took place directly in the fields or at small open-air work areas near the vineyard. Workers removed damaged or underripe grapes, as these could affect the quality of products such as raisins or wine. Grapes meant for sun-drying were spread out on flat surfaces, often woven mats, packed earth platforms, or large pottery trays. Drying required several days, 2 weeks, depending on the climate. Regions with dry summer weather, such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, and parts of the Levant, were ideal for producing raisins. Workers periodically turned the grapes to ensure uniform drying. Once dried, the raisins were collected, packed into clay jars or woven containers, and stored for long-term use. They served not only as food but also as trade goods, especially in caravans where their durability and nutritional value made them highly sought after. Processing grapes into juice or wine required more specialized equipment. The most common tool was the grape press. Early presses varied widely in design. The simplest type was the foot-stomping basin, where workers trod on grapes to release their juice. These basins were often carved directly into rock or made from hardened clay. They featured a shallow upper area for grapes and a lower area into which juice flowed. Archaeological remains of such installations appear in many ancient regions, including the Levant and the Caucasus. More advanced presses involved wooden beams, stone weights, and lever mechanisms that applied greater pressure. These produced higher yields and more consistent juice extraction. Evidence from Bronze Age sites shows that such presses were in use by at least the 3rd millennium BCE. The juice collected from pressing was transferred into large pottery jars, often amphorae, or specialized fermentation vessels. Fermentation, while not fully understood scientifically, became an established craft. In many areas, grape juice was left to ferment naturally using wild yeast present on grape skins. The process generally began within a day. Fermentation jars were partially sealed with cloth, leaves, or clay stoppers to allow gases to escape while protecting the liquid from insects or debris. After the active fermentation phase subsided, the jars were sealed completely for storage. Some cultures buried the jars partially underground to stabilize temperature and prolong shelf life. Storage played a crucial role in grape utilization. Fresh grapes spoiled quickly, so ancient societies developed various storage methods to prolong their availability. In cooler climates, they placed freshly harvested clusters in shaded, ventilated rooms or hung them from ceilings to prevent moisture buildup. In regions with more developed architecture, underground storage chambers constructed for fruits and grains alike helped maintain a consistent temperature, extending grape freshness for weeks. For wine and juice, storage relied on pottery or later wooden containers. Pottery jars were coated internally with resin, pitch, or wax to prevent leakage and protect the contents. These sealed containers allowed grape products to be transported over long distances. Trade records from Mesopotamia show that wine was regularly transported in jars along river routes. Similarly, coastal societies shipped wine across the Mediterranean, marking the beginning of an international trade network that persisted for centuries. Aside from fresh grapes, raisins, and wine, ancient societies also produced byproducts such as must to thicken grape juice, vinegar, and grape syrup. Must was created by boiling grape juice until it thickened, making it a sweetener and preservative for various foods. Vinegar was produced either intentionally or as a result of wines. It served as a cleaning agent, preservative, and ingredient in cooking. Grape syrup appeared in some regions as a concentrated form of grape sweetness, valuable in areas where honey or other sweeteners were limited. Another overlooked aspect of grape processing was the use of seeds and skins. After pressing, the leftover material known today as pumice was sometimes used as animal feed or dried for fuel. In some regions, seeds were crushed to extract grapeseed oil, which served in lamps or medicinal preparations. Throughout ancient societies, the grape's versatility made it a cornerstone of food systems, trade networks, and domestic life. The methods developed for harvesting, processing, and storage laid the groundwork for viticulture practices that still influence the modern world. The techniques established thousands of years ago enabled grapes to become not only an important food source, but also a culturally significant product whose value extended far beyond the vineyard. Cultural, economic, and trade significance of grapes in ancient civilizations. As grape cultivation and processing techniques developed, the fruit took on roles far beyond its agricultural origins. Grapes, raisins, and wine became deeply integrated into the social, economic, and cultural systems of ancient civilizations. Chapter 4 explores how grapes shaped trade networks, influenced social customs, and became symbols of status, ritual, and identity across the ancient world. Economically, grapes quickly became one of the most valuable crops in regions, suited to their versatility. Fresh fruit, dried fruit, juice, wine, vinegar, and syrup made them a reliable commodity with multiple markets. Vineyard owners in ancient Mesopotamia, Canaan, Egypt, Greece, and later Rome understood that grapes offered both local sustenance and external trade opportunities. The ability to convert grapes into stable, long-lasting products such as raisins and wine made the crop particularly important in long-distance commerce. In Mesopotamia, grapes were considered a high-value agricultural product, especially in regions where they could not be easily grown. Urban centers like Ur and Babylon imported wine from northern territories. Administrative tablets reveal extensive records of wine rations, storage facilities, and trade agreements, demonstrating that wine was not simply a luxury, but also a regulated economic commodity. Temples and palaces often controlled vineyards and wine distribution, reflecting the crop's importance to elite households and religious institutions. The Levant and the Eastern Mediterranean played a central role in early grape and wine trade. Canaanite merchants developed sophisticated methods for shipping wine in amphiric clay vessels designed to be stacked and transported efficiently across sea routes. Archaeological finds from shipwrecks confirm that large quantities of Canaanite wine were traded to Egypt, Cyprus, Mycenaean Greece, and Anatolia. This trade helped establish economic links across the Mediterranean and contributed to the rise of merchant cities. Egypt's relationship with grapes was shaped primarily by cultural and ritual needs, rather than agricultural abundance. While the Nile Valley supported some vineyards, many regions were too hot for optimal wine production. As a result, Egypt became a major importer of wine. Records from the Old Kingdom onward show that wine was used in ceremonial offerings, royal banquets, and funerary traditions. Jars placed in tombs often bore labels identifying vineyard origins, harvest years, and producers on early form of vintage classification. This level of documentation indicates that wine had both economic and symbolic value. In the ancient Near East and Mediterranean, grapes also held significant cultural meaning. For many societies, wine became associated with hospitality, religious rites, and communal gatherings. In Mesopotamia, wine offerings appeared in religious ceremonies dedicated to gods and goddesses. In Egypt, wine was closely tied to rituals honoring Osiris, the god of rebirth. The Greeks later developed the most elaborate cultural connections, with wine becoming central to festivals, philosophical gatherings, and religious ceremonies dedicated to Dionysus. Although much of this Greek tradition developed later than the earliest grape cultivation, it built upon a long-established regional appreciation of grape-based products. Raisins also held economic and cultural importance. Their durability made them ideal for provisioning armies and caravans. Soldiers in various ancient societies received raisins as part of their rations, and merchants carried them along trade routes stretching from Arabia to the Mediterranean. Raisins also served as ingredients in breads, cakes, and ritual offerings. Their ease of transport increased their value in marketplaces. Grapes influenced social hierarchies as well. Access to high-quality wine often indicated social status. Elite households typically controlled vineyards, as they required long-term investment and maintenance. Palatial estates and temple complexes in the Near East managed some of the largest vineyards, using laborers or enslaved workers for cultivation and harvest. Surpluses produced by these estates strengthened political power by allowing rulers to distribute wine during festivals, diplomatic meetings, and religious events. In addition to trade and ritual use, grapes played a role in early science and technology. The fermentation process, though not understood chemically, was observed, recorded, and refined over generations. Ancient societies experimented with different storage methods, vessel shapes, and additives. Suchas resin, herbs, and spices too improve preservation or flavor. These experiments contributed to early knowledge of food processing and storage. Vine cultivation also fostered technological exchange between cultures. As traders moved grape products across regions, they carried agricultural knowledge with them. Techniques developed in the Near East influenced Greek viticulture, which in turn influenced Roman practices. The spread of viticulture across Europe was driven largely by cultural adoption, rooted in earlier innovations from the Near East. Each region adapted cultivation and processing methods to its own environment, but the core technique, pruning, pressing, and storage remained consistent. Economically, grape products also played a role in taxation and state revenue. Some ancient governments levied taxes on vineyards, wine presses, or wine trade. These taxes contributed to state economies and funded public works. In certain societies, vineyard ownership required registration with authorities, further demonstrating the crop's economic significance. The symbolic importance of grapes also appeared in art and literature. Ancient carvings, pottery, and wall paintings frequently depicted vineyards, harvest scenes, or wine consumption. These images communicated themes of abundance, ritual, and community. Some cultures used the grapevine as a metaphor for life, lineage, or prosperity, while the meaning varied from one civilization to another. The consistent presence of the grape in artistic expression highlights its cultural prominence. By the end of the Bronze Age, grapes had become deeply embedded in daily life, economy, ritual practice, and international commerce. The fruit's adaptability and the ease with which it could be processed into valuable goods ensured its enduring significance. The foundations established in the ancient world set the stage for the grape's central role in later civilizations, influencing agriculture, trade, and culture for millennia. The ancient origins of the apple and early human cultivation. The apple is one of the most widely recognized fruits in the world today, but its story begins long before written history. Its origins lie in the mountainous regions of Central Asia, particularly the forests of present-day Kazakhstan, where the wild ancestor of the domestic apple Melos sieversis still grows. These ancient forests, stretching across the Tian Shan Mountains, contained a remarkable diversity of wild apple types, varying in size, sweetness, acidity, and resistance to disease. This natural diversity created the foundation for one of humanity's most successful fruit domestications. Early hunter-gatherer groups encountered wild apples as they traveled through Central Asia and the Eurasian steppe. At first, the fruit served as a seasonal food source, collected during late summer and early autumn. Archaeological evidence suggests that wild apples were part of human diets in the Paleolithic period, though on a small scale compared to other foraged foods. What changed the apple's role in human societies was the gradual expansion of trade routes, especially those that would later become part of the Silk Road. As travelers moved between east and west, they carried apple seeds, intentionally or unintentionally, spreading the fruit beyond its native range. Seed dispersal alone, however, did not lead to domestication. Apples have a genetic trait called extreme heterogeneity, meaning that seeds produce trees dramatically different from their parents. Planting a seed from a sweet, desirable apple might result in a tree with small, sour fruit. This variability slowed the development of stable, high-quality apple varieties in early agricultural societies. Nonetheless, farmers in Central Asia began selecting seedlings that produced favorable fruit. Over generations, this gradual selection produced early forms of improved apples, though they were still variable. The key breakthrough came with the discovery of grafting. Although the exact origin of grafting is debated, it was certainly known in the ancient Near East by the 2nd millennium BCE. Grafting allowed farmers to clone a specific apple variety by attaching a branch from a desired tree onto the rootstock of another. This technique ensured that future trees would produce fruit identical to the parent variety. For a genetically unpredictable species like the apple, grafting was transformative. It enabled farmers to expand orchards with consistent, high-quality fruit, turning apples into a reliable agricultural product. As apple cultivation spread westward into Persia, to Near East, and eventually the Mediterranean, farmers adapted techniques to local climates. Apples prefer cooler temperatures, well-drained soil, and a defined winter chill period. These conditions were ideal in the temperate regions of Iran, northern Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levant. Early orchards were often established near settlements for easy access, and trees were spaced widely to allow sunlight to reach every branch. Farmers recognized that apple trees took several years to bear fruit, making orcharding a long-term investment. However, once established, an orchard could remain productive for decades. The earliest documented evidence of apples in human agriculture comes from the Middle Bronze Age in the Near East. Botanical remains, seeds, and preserved fruit fragments have been found in archaeological sites across Turkey, Syria, and Israel. These discoveries indicate that apples were consumed fresh, dried, or cooked. Some varieties may have been tart and better suited for drying or baking, while others were sweet enough for raw consumption. As apples moved into Europe, their significance continued to grow. In the regions surrounding the Black Sea and the Balkans, apples thrived in the cooler environment. The Greeks likely encountered apples through interactions with Persian and Anatolian cultures. Although the Greeks grew apples, they rarely wrote extensively about them, focusing more on grapes and olives. Still, orchards gradually spread across Greek territories. The Romans played a crucial role in the widespread domestication and distribution of apples in Europe. They adopted grafting techniques from earlier cultures and became some of the first to document apple varieties systematically. Roman agricultural writers such as Pliny the Elder described numerous apple types and the methods used to cultivate them. Roman orchards were well organized, often laid out in rows with structured pruning practices. As the Roman Empire expanded, apples followed, reaching regions such as Gaul, Britain, and parts of Germany. The cooler climates of these regions were ideal for apple cultivation, further accelerating the fruit's spread. Trade routes also contributed significantly to the apple's journey. As merchants traveled across Eurasia, they carried not only apple seeds but also grafted saplings and agricultural knowledge. This movement helped apples integrate into the diets and farming systems of diverse cultures. Over centuries, apple varieties continued to hybridize naturally with local wild species, increasing genetic diversity. This interplay between nature and human selection produced the foundation for the many apple types known today. By the end of the ancient era, apples had transitioned from a wild, unpredictable fruit of Central Asian forests to a cultivated crop grown across Europe, to Near East, and parts of South Asia. Their domestication relied on environmental suitability, selective breeding, technological innovation, and cultural exchange. The apple. Its long history demonstrates how agriculture evolves through both deliberate human decision-making and the natural traits of the plants themselves. This early period set the stage for the significant economic, culinary, and cultural roles that apples would play in later civilizations. With orchards now established in numerous regions, apples became a stable part of agricultural life. paving the way for advances in cultivation techniques, preservation methods, and trade practices that would shape the fruit's legacy for millennia. Cultivation techniques and orchard management in ancient apple-growing societies. As apple cultivation spread from its Central Asian origins across the Near East and into Europe, ancient farmers developed a variety of orchard management techniques to grow healthier trees and produce more reliable fruit. Apples required long-term planting, consistent care, and knowledge that evolved over generations. This chapter examines how ancient societies planted, nurtured, and managed apple orchards to ensure productive harvests. One of the earliest and most important techniques in apple cultivation was grafting, which transformed the apple from an unpredictable wild fruit into a manageable agricultural crop. Unlike grapes, which could often be grown directly from cuttings, apples needed grafting to maintain desirable traits. Farmers selected a healthy and productive apple variety, cut a small branch or bud, and attached it to the rootstock of a young tree. The rootstock itself could come from wild seedlings, which were often more resilient to local soil and climate conditions. This combination of strong rootstock and high-quality fruit-bearing scion allowed growers to create standardized orchards with consistent fruit types. Grafting also influenced orchard layout, because grafted trees tended to remain smaller and more manageable than seed-grown trees. Farmers could plant them at more uniform intervals. In regions like Persia, Anatolia, and later the Mediterranean, orchards were often planted in rows, with spacing that allowed each tree sufficient sunlight and airflow. Proper spacing was essential for reducing the risk of fungal diseases, which were a threat in humid or rainy regions. Soil preparation was another important aspect of orchard management. Apple trees preferred well-drained soils, sandy loams, river terraces, and gentle slopes. Farmers avoided planting in heavy clay or waterlogged areas, which could stunt tree growth or cause root rot. Before planting, they sometimes loosened the soil with wooden or bronze tools, mixed in organic matter, and cleared stones to improve root penetration. In mountainous regions, orchard terraces were constructed to create level ground and prevent erosion. These terraces, similar to those used for grape cultivation, provided stable planting zones on steep terrain. Water management varied significantly across regions. In the Near East, where rainfall was inconsistent, apple orchards often required irrigation. Early irrigation systems, canals, channels, and small basins were used to direct water from rivers or springs to tree roots. However, farmers took care not to overwater apples, as excessive moisture encouraged disease. In contrast, in Europe's temperate regions, natural rainfall was usually sufficient, and irrigation was minimal. Orchards in wetter climates relied more on good soil drainage and proper tree spacing to maintain orchard health. Pruning was another critical technique. Farmers pruned apple trees to shape their growth, improve sunlight exposure, and encourage fruiting. While the scientific understanding of pruning came much later, ancient growers recognized that removing dead branches and thinning dense growth improved the tree's productivity. Pruning also prevented branches from becoming overly long or fragile, which could break under the weight of the fruit. Evidence from Roman agricultural texts indicates that winter pruning was widely practiced, allowing trees to rest before the next growing season. Protecting apple trees from pests and diseases was a constant challenge in ancient orchards. Insects, fungal infections, and wildlife all threatened the crop. Farmers employed various strategies to minimize damage. Small trenches around the base of trees could deter crawling insects. Ash and lime were sometimes sprinkled to prevent rot or discourage pests. Nets or woven screens were used in some regions to protect ripening fruit from birds. In areas with grazing animals, orchards were often fenced to prevent livestock from damaging young trees. Weed control also played a role in orchard maintenance. Competing plants could steal nutrients and water from apple trees, especially in arid regions. Farmers used simple tools to remove weeds manually or planted low-growing cover crops that helped suppress unwanted vegetation while improving soil quality. These activities required regular labor, making orchard management a year-round task. The life cycle of an apple orchard influenced agricultural planning. Apple trees took several years to bear fruit, often 5 to 8 years depending on the variety and conditions. This delay meant that planting an orchard was an investment not only in one's own future but often in the next generation's livelihood. Once productive, however, apple trees could bear fruit for decades. Some ancient orchards consisted of mixed ages, with young trees planted alongside mature ones, to ensure a steady supply over time. Regional climate shaped the selection of apple varieties. In warmer areas, farmers preferred varieties that tolerated heat and produced fruit earlier in the season. In cooler environments, varieties with greater cold tolerance were favored. Over time, farmers learned which types performed best in their specific region, and this knowledge became part of local agricultural tradition. The Romans, for example, identified and classified apple varieties based on taste, storage ability, and culinary use. Their records show an early understanding of varietal specialization. Training young apple trees was also a fundamental technique. Farmers guided the shape of the tree by tying branches to stakes or weighting them with stones. Creating a strong central trunk and evenly spaced lateral branches helped support future fruit loads. This structured growth pattern improved airflow and sunlight penetration, reducing disease and increasing yield. Maintenance of the orchard extended beyond the trees themselves. Paths needed to be kept clear to allow movement during pruning, watering, and harvesting. Boundary markers or stone walls often surrounded orchards, both to protect them and to signify ownership. Orchards were valuable assets, so protecting them from theft or animal intrusion was a practical necessity. By the classical era, apple cultivation had become a respected agricultural craft across many regions. Techniques developed in the Near East spread into Europe, where they merged with local knowledge to form sophisticated orchard systems. The combination of grafting, pruning, irrigation, soil preparation, and pest control techniques enabled ancient farmers to transform a wild, genetically unpredictable fruit into a reliable and versatile crop. These foundational techniques laid the groundwork for apple agriculture for centuries to come. Many practices used by ancient growers, such as grafting, pruning, and orchard layout, remain central to modern apple cultivation, demonstrating the lasting impact of early agricultural innovation. Harvesting, processing, and storage of apples in ancient societies. The harvesting, processing, and storage of apples played a crucial role in ancient agriculture, especially in regions where the fruit became a seasonal staple. Apple trees typically produced their harvest in late summer to early autumn, and because the fruit ripened relatively quickly and spoiled over time, ancient societies developed detailed systems to manage each stage efficiently. This chapter explores how apples were harvested, prepared, and preserved in different civilizations. Harvesting began with determining when apples were ready to pick. Ancient farmers relied on practical markers. The fruit's color deepened, the flesh became firmer or softer depending on the variety, and apples began to detach easily from the branch with a gentle twist. Some varieties were harvested earlier for cooking or storage, while sweeter varieties were picked later for fresh eating. Ancient agricultural records, including those from Roman writers such as Pliny the Elder and Calimela, note that apples were picked selectively rather than all at once. This ensured that only properly ripened fruit was gathered, reducing spoilage and improving overall quality. Harvesting apples required careful handling. Unlike grapes, which could be picked in large clusters, apples needed to be gathered individually to prevent bruising. Workers used woven baskets lined with straw or leaves to cushion the fruit, and children often participated by picking fallen apples, which were used for cooking or cider rather than fresh consumption. In some regions, ladders or tree climbing tools were used to reach higher branches, while shorter, pruned trees allowed workers to harvest more safely from the ground. Once apples were picked, sorting began immediately. Fresh, unblemished apples were separated from damaged or overripe ones. The best quality fruit was reserved for long-term storage or trade, while imperfect apples were used for immediate consumption, cooking, drying, or pressing. Sorting was typically done in shaded outdoor areas or in simple barns, where direct sunlight and heat would not cause the fruit to deteriorate. Processing methods varied greatly across regions, but generally included drying, cooking, and pressing. Drying was one of the oldest and most widespread methods of preservation. Apples were sliced into thin pieces and laid out on mats, cloth, wooden boards, or heated stone surfaces. In hot, dry climates such as parts of Persia or the Near East, the sun alone was sufficient. In cooler or humid regions, apples might be dried near ovens or hearths, taking advantage of residual heat. Dried apples provided a lightweight, nutrient-dense food ideal for winter months or long journeys. Cooking apples into sauces or pastes was another common practice. Some ancient societies boiled sliced apples with honey or grape must, producing sweet preserves that could be stored for long periods. These early fruit pastes served as both food and valuable trade goods, especially in regions where sweeteners were scarce. Apple stews or soft-cooked apples were also common in daily meals, providing a versatile ingredient for porridge, breads, and meat dishes. Pressing apples into juice or fermented beverages represented another significant method of processing. Although grape wine dominated many cultures, apple-based drinks held important regional roles. In parts of northern Europe, where grape cultivation was limited, apple cider became a practical alternative. Even in regions further south, fermented apple beverages were known, though not always widely documented. Ancient presses for apples were similar to those used for grapestone basins. Wooden presses, or simple manual squeezing techniques. Apple juice could be consumed fresh, boiled into syrup, or allowed to ferment naturally into cider or vinegar. Vinegar production was particularly important. Apple vinegar offered a long-lasting product used for cooking, preserving foods, and medicinal preparations. Vinegar jars found in archaeological sites across the Mediterranean suggest that apple-based vinegars were common enough to be stored in households and markets. The production process often involved allowing leftover apples, cores, and bruised fruit to ferment, ensuring that no part of the harvest went to waste. Storage was critical because apples were a seasonal crop, and ancient societies relied on them as a winter food source. Proper storage could extend their shelf life for several months. The ideal conditions were cool temperatures, moderate humidity, and good airflow. Many ancient communities created underground or partially buried storage rooms, often called fruit cellars. These structures maintained stable temperatures throughout winter and protected apples from freezing or overheating. Apples were stored either in baskets, clay jars, wooden crates, or spread out on shelves lined with straw. Each apple was kept separate to prevent rot from spreading. A single spoiled apple could ruin an entire batch. Some ancient writers recommended wrapping apples individually in leaves or grain husks to prolong freshness. In colder climates, storage areas were sometimes built below houses, doubling as pantries for other perishable foods such as grains or root vegetables. Another method used in some regions was hanging apples from rafters by their stems. This increased airflow around each fruit and reduced moisture buildup. Alternatively, apples could be stored in shallow pits, lined with sand or straw, though this method was more common for short-term storage. Large estate orchards and temples often maintained even more sophisticated storage systems. For example, in parts of the Near East, records describe storage jars labeled by apple variety, ripening season, or intended use. Roman estates sometimes assigned specialized workers to oversee storage rooms, ensuring that apples were checked regularly for apple storage also had social and economic implications. A well-managed orchard with efficient storage facilities could provide food throughout the winter, making apples an important component of household survival. Surplus apples or apple products could be sold, traded, or used to fulfill taxes or tribute obligations. In regions with established orchard traditions, apples became part of the broader agricultural economy. By developing effective harvesting, processing, and storage techniques, ancient societies transformed the apple from a seasonal fruit into a dependable year-round resource. These methods allowed apples to support growing populations, influence dietary habits, and contribute to long-distance trade networks. The knowledge accumulated during this era laid the foundation for apple preservation practices that continued into the medieval period and beyond. Cultural, economic, and trade significance of apples in ancient civilizations. As apple cultivation spread across the ancient world, the fruit took on roles that went beyond simple nourishment. Apples became interwoven with cultural traditions, economic systems, and long-distance trade networks. Their versatility, storability, and adaptability to a wide range of climates made them valuable to households, marketplaces, and state economies. This chapter explores the broader significance of apples in ancient societies, highlighting how the fruit shaped daily life, belief systems, and commerce. Economically, apples served as a dependable seasonal crop with multiple uses. Fresh apples provided immediate food, dried apples extended availability into winter, and processed products such as vinegar, cider, and fruit pastes added value and longevity. Orchards were long-term investments, requiring years to mature but yielding fruit for decades, making them important assets for landowners. In regions with developed agricultural systems, such as Persia, Anatolia, and later the Roman Empire, orchards contributed to estate wealth and could be inherited or sold as valuable property. In the ancient Near East, apples were part of regional trade, though not as extensively as grapes or dates. Their ability to be dried or stored made them suitable for caravans and local markets. Botanica remains found in Bronze Age sites across Mesopotamia and the Levant indicate that apples were exchanged between settlements, and textual records suggest their presence in tribute lists or offerings. Although not a major export commodity compared to olives or wine, apples still played a consistent role in local economies. In Persia and Central Asia, apples held both economic and symbolic value. The Achaemenid Persians cultivated various fruits in royal gardens, known as paradises, where apples were planted alongside pomegranates, figs, and grapes. These gardens displayed wealth, agricultural knowledge, and the empire's ability to tame and cultivate nature. Apples grown in these gardens may have been used for banquets, diplomatic gifts, and ceremonial feasts. The presence of apples in royal contexts indicates their elevated status within Persian society. The Greeks encountered apples primarily through trade and agricultural exchange with Persian and Anatolian cultures. While apples never reached the cultural prominence of grapes or olives in Greece, they did carry symbolic meaning. Apples were associated with love, marriage, and divine favor in Greek mythology. The golden apple in the myth of the Judgment of Paris is a well-known example of how apples entered storytelling and symbolic traditions. Although these myths developed independently of agricultural practices, they reflect the fruit's presence in daily life and cultural imagination. The Romans played a crucial role in elevating the apple's economic and cultural significance. With their extensive agricultural knowledge, the Romans cultivated numerous apple varieties and recorded their characteristics. Apple orchards became common throughout the Roman Empire, especially in cooler provinces such as Gaul, northern Italy, and Britain. Roman estates often employed specialized workers to manage orchards. Reflecting the fruit's economic importance, apples were widely consumed in Roman society. They were served fresh at banquets, used in cooking, made into sauces, and preserved for winter. Roman texts mention apple dishes prepared with honey, spices, or wine reductions. Apple vinegar was used in posca, a diluted vinegar drink consumed by soldiers and laborers. The versatility of apples made them a regular part of both elite and common diets. Trade also played a role in the apple's spread. As Roman influence extended across Europe, apple varieties traveled with settlers, soldiers, and merchants. Grafted apple trees were transported to new regions, and orchards were planted near military camps, villas, and towns. Apples that thrived in colder northern climates supported settlements where Mediterranean crops, such as olives and grapes, struggled. Thus, apples contributed indirectly to the expansion and stability of Roman frontier regions. Culturally, apples held symbolic meanings in several traditions. In parts of the Near East and Central Asia, apples were associated with fertility, abundance, and hospitality. Offering apples to guests signified welcome and goodwill. In some regions, apple blossoms marked the arrival of spring and renewal. Ancient poetry and folklore referenced apples as symbols of beauty, longevity, or prosperity. Religious and ritual uses of apples varied by culture. In Zoroastrian traditions, fruit offerings, including apples, appeared in rituals symbolizing purity and the renewal of life. In some Anatolian and Levantine traditions, apples were included in harvest celebrations, representing the completion of the agricultural cycle. While the symbolic meanings differed, the presence of apples in ceremonies highlights their cultural integration. Apples also influenced early science and horticulture. Their cultivation encouraged experimentation with grafting techniques, orchard layouts, and varietal selection. Roman agricultural texts preserved knowledge that shaped medieval and later fruit-growing practices. The diversities of apple type of sweet, tart, early, and long-keeping reflected centuries of observation and selective breeding. The economic significance of apples grew alongside expanding orchard systems. Surpluses could be sold in markets, used for tax payments, or processed into goods with higher trade value. Apple cider became particularly important, in regions unsuitable for wine production, providing a stable, year-round beverage. Vinegar, another valuable byproduct, served in food preservation and medicine, making apples an essential part of domestic life. Ultimately, apples became more than just a fruit. They became a marker of settled agriculture, long-term investment, and cultural expression. Their adaptability allowed them to thrive in diverse environments, supporting communities from the Near East to Northern Europe. By the end of the ancient era, apples had secured a place not only in orchards, but in mythology, trade networks, culinary traditions, and household economies. The foundations laid during these early centuries would continue to shape the apple's role in world history for millennia. The ancient origins of the date palm and early human cultivation. The date palm phoenix, dactylifera, is one of humanity's earliest domesticated fruit trees and a cornerstone of ancient agriculture. In arid regions, its history stretches back more than 6,000 years, deeply intertwined with the rise of early civilizations in Mesopotamia, Arabia, and North Africa. Unlike many fruits that require temperate climates or fertile soils, the date palm thrives in harsh environments, making it uniquely valuable in areas where few other crops could survive. This chapter explores the genetic origins, environmental requirements, and early domestication processes that shaped the date palm's long-standing importance in human history. The wild ancestors of the date palm are believed to have grown naturally in the regions surrounding the Arabian Gulf, including parts of present-day Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. Genetic studies suggest that domesticated dates may have originated from multiple wild populations, indicating that early humans selected superior trees from different areas. These early cultivators recognized the palm's unique characteristics: deep root systems capable of accessing underground water, resilience to high temperatures, and the ability to bear fruit in extremely dry climates. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia shows that date palms were cultivated as early as 4000 BC. Seeds, pollen records, and ancient irrigation remains point to systematic planting near settlements and along riverbanks. The Sumerians included dates in their administrative tablets, listing them as important agricultural commodities. Clay tablets, from the city of your record, the management of date groves, including planting schedules, water distribution, and harvest yields. This documentation indicates that by the early Bronze Age, date cultivation had already become a structured and economically significant practice. The environmental requirements of the date palm strongly influenced where early civilizations developed. The tree thrives under a combination, often summarized as feet in water, head in fire. In other words, date palms grow best when their roots can reach groundwater, while their crowns receive intense sunlight and heat. These conditions were abundant in Mesopotamia's river-fed oases, in the wadis of Arabia, and along the Nile Valley. Thus, date palms encouraged settlement in regions where water sources were intermittent but accessible through wells, springs, or irrigation channels. One of the distinctive features of date palms is that they are dioecious. Male and female flowers grow on separate trees. Early farmers, through observation, learned that only female palms produced fruit, and only when pollinated by males. This discovery led to one of the most significant innovations in ancient agriculture: artificial pollination. Instead of relying on wind or insects, farmers climbed female palms and manually inserted male pollen into the flower clusters. This technique dramatically increased yields and ensured consistent production. Artificial pollination is one of the earliest forms of controlled plant reproduction and remains central to date farming today. The domestication of dates also depended on selecting superior varieties. Wild dates can be fibrous, small, or insufficiently sweet. Ancient cultivators identified trees with desirable traits: larger size, higher sugar content, softer texture, and propagated them using offshoots. Offshoot propagation is a form of cloning in which young shoots emerging from the base of the mother tree are separated and planted. This technique allowed farmers to replicate high-quality date palms while maintaining genetic stability, an advantage not possible through seed planting alone. As a result, early date groves became home to distinct varieties suited to local preferences and environmental conditions. Date palms shaped the landscape and agricultural systems of ancient societies. In many regions, They formed the upper layer of a multi-tiered farming structure called the Oasis system. Tall date palms provided shade for the second layer of crops such as figs, pomegranates, or grapes, while a third layer of vegetables and grains grew at ground level. This system maximized limited water resources and created microclimates that supported a diversity of plants. The Oasis agriculture model spread across North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, becoming a defining feature of settled life in desert regions. The presence of date palms also encouraged the development of irrigation infrastructure. In Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula, early farmers constructed canals, wells, and drainage systems to maintain consistent moisture at the palm's roots. Maintaining water flow required organized labor and cooperation, shaping community structures and contributing to early governance systems. The economic importance of dates meant that groves were often under the control of temples, palaces, or large family estates, which managed water rights and labor distribution. Beyond their agricultural role, dates were essential to the survival of desert communities. The fruit provided significant calories, vitamins, and minerals, making it a staple food. Its long shelf life made dates ideal for storage and travel, supporting long-distance trade and nomadic lifestyles. The date palm also offered non-food benefits: trunks for construction, fronds for weaving, fiber for ropes, and seeds for animal feed. This multi-purpose nature contributed to its reputation as the tree of life. By the end of the ancient period, the date palm had spread far beyond its original homeland. Phoenician, Persian, and later Roman traders carried date products across the Mediterranean and into Europe. Meanwhile, cultivation expanded deeper into North Africa, supported by oasis networks and caravan routes. The domestication practices developed in early Mesopotamia and Arabia set the foundation for an agricultural tradition that remains vital today. The domestication of the date palm was not a single event, but a long and complex process involving environmental adaptation, cultural innovation, and selective breeding. Its success in some of the world's harshest climates made it indispensable to ancient civilizations, shaping settlement patterns, trade networks, and food systems for millennia. Cultivation techniques and oasis management in ancient date-growing societies. The successful cultivation of date palms in ancient societies relied on a combination of specialized farming techniques, environmental management, and social organization. Unlike many fruit trees, date palms required continuous human intervention, particularly in pollination, irrigation, and grove maintenance. This chapter examines how ancient date-growing communities planted, nurtured, and managed their groves, with a special focus on the oasis agricultural systems that sustained life in extremely arid regions. The foundation of ancient date cultivation was site selection. Farmers looked for areas with access to underground water springs, shallow aquifers, seasonal streams, or proximity to major rivers. The date palm's deep root system allowed it to reach moisture far below the surface, but consistent groundwater availability was essential for reliable fruiting. As a result, groves were often established in low-lying depressions, near riverbanks, or around natural oases. In Mesopotamia, groves lined the canals, branching from the Tigris and Euphrates, while in Arabia and North Africa, palms clustered around wells and seasonal water sources. Irrigation was the most important aspect of date palm cultivation. Ancient societies developed sophisticated systems to ensure that palms received steady moisture. In Mesopotamia, long canal networks delivered water across large agricultural estates. Smaller channels directed water to individual palms or groups of trees. Farmers relied on gates and clay barriers to control flow, preventing both flooding and drought stress. In Arabian oases, irrigation often came from hand-dug wells or flaconat systems, underground channels that transported water from distant sources to cultivated areas. These systems required constant maintenance and community cooperation, reflecting the collective importance of date groves. Planting methods varied depending on whether farmers used seeds or offshoots. While seeds could be planted directly, the resulting trees were unpredictable in quality, often producing inferior fruit. Therefore, ancient farmers preferred offshoot propagation, a method that ensured identical genetic characteristics. Offshoots, young palms sprouting from the base of mature trees, were carefully separated and reaped. The process required skill as improper removal could damage both the mother tree and the offshoot. Once planted, the young palms needed several years of attentive watering and shading before they matured. Managing the structure and spacing of groves was another critical aspect of cultivation. Date palms grow tolofan, exceeding 15 to 25 meters, so spacing allowed for both sunlight exposure and access. For workers in dense oasis environments, palms formed the uppermost layer of a multi-tiered agricultural system. Beneath their canopy, farmers grew fruit trees such as pomegranates, figs, and citrus. At ground level, they cultivated grains, vegetables, and fodder crops. This three-tier farming system maximized microclimates and protected lower crops from the intense desert sun. The shade from palms reduced evaporation, allowing communities to grow a wide range of crops despite limited water. Pollination represented one of the most labor-intensive tasks in date cultivation. Because date palms are dioecious, male and female flowers grow on separate trees. Pollination does not occur efficiently without human intervention. Ancient farmers learned to manually transfer pollen from male flowers to female clusters. Workers climbed the tall palms using rope belts or ladders, carrying bundles of male flowers. They inserted these into the female clusters or shook pollen directly onto them. This ensured high fruit yields and consistent quality. Artificial pollination is one of the earliest documented examples of controlled plant reproduction in human history, and remains integral to date farming today. Maintenance of the palm itself required additional effort. Farmers removed old fronds to prevent pests and reduce fire risks. They cleaned trunks, trimmed damaged leaves, and ensured fruit clusters were properly supported. In regions where strong winds were common, growers tied bunches to sturdy branches or used palm fiber ropes to secure them. This prevented fruit loss during storms. Pest and disease control was an ongoing concern. Insects such as beetles or moth larvae could damage fruit or weaken the tree. Farmers used ash, dust, or oil mixtures to deter pests, applying them around the base or onto developing fruit. Birds and animals were also threats, especially in oases, where food sources were scarce. Communities built simple fences, watch platforms, or noise-making devices to protect the groves. During ripening season, the management of date groves influenced local social structures. Because irrigation required constant oversight, communities often established shared water rights or schedules. In Mesopotamia, temples and palaces frequently controlled large groves, using specialized workers for irrigation, pollination, and harvesting. In Arabian oases, date groves were typically managed by extended families, with responsibilities passed down through generations. These cooperative systems shaped community identity and contributed to the stability of settlements. The layout of date groves also reflected their long-term importance. A single date palm could remain productive for 60 to 80 years, and some varieties lived for over a century. Planting a grove, therefore, was considered an investment for future generations. The continuity of groves created stable agricultural centers in otherwise harsh landscapes, enabling trade, travel, and urban development. Oasis management extended beyond the groves themselves. Communities maintained protective walls or embankments to prevent sand encroachment. They monitored the health of wells and irrigation channels, repaired erosion damage, and coordinated planting cycles for the multi-tier system. The success of an oasis depended on harmonious interaction between environment, agriculture, and social organization. In summary, date cultivation in the ancient world was a highly advanced agricultural practice requiring specialized knowledge and continuous labor. The combination of artificial pollination, irrigation, engineering, offshoot propagation, and multi-tier farming created sustainable ecosystems and environments otherwise unsuited for agriculture. These innovations transformed deserts into productive landscapes, supporting some of the world's earliest civilizations and laying the foundation for agricultural traditions that persist to this day. Harvesting, processing, and storage of dates in ancient societies. The harvesting, processing, and storage of dates formed the backbone of food systems in ancient desert and riverine civilizations. Because date palms were capable of producing significant yields, up to 50 kilograms of fruit per tree, managing the harvest required skill, manpower, and specialized tools. This chapter explores the techniques ancient societies used to collect ripe dates, prepare them for consumption or trade, and store them for long-term use. Harvesting dates began with understanding the fruit's development stages. Dates do not ripen all at once. Instead, they pass through several phases: skimmery, unripe, khalil, kruni, and full-sized, rutub, softening and partially ripe, and tamar, fully ripe and dried on the palm. Ancient farmers learned to harvest different stages, depending on regional preference and intended use. For example, in Mesopotamia and Arabia, fully ripened tamar dates were most valued for storage and trade, while in some parts of Egypt, the slightly earlier khalil stage was consumed fresh, because date clusters grow high above the ground, often 10 to 20 meters. Harvesting was a physically demanding and specialized task. Skilled climbers used rope belts, leather harnesses, or ladders to ascend the trunks. Their familiarity with each tree ensured rapid and safe movement. Harvesters carried baskets or sacks, removing clusters with knives or by twisting them free. Care was taken not to damage the crown of the tree, which could reduce future productivity. In some regions, families or hired laborers worked together, with climbers cutting the fruit and helpers below collecting and sorting it. Sorting occurred immediately after harvesting. Dates were separated by ripeness, quality, and intended use. Fresh dates were consumed quickly or processed into short-term foods, while semi-dried or dried dates were reserved for storage or trade. Any damaged or overripe fruit was set aside for pressing into syrup or brewing into date wine. This sorting process ensured that only high-quality fruit entered long-term storage, reducing the risk of spoilage. Processing methods for dates were diverse due to the fruit's unique properties. One of the most common techniques was sun-drying, which required no additional tools or materials. Dates left on the palm often dried naturally, reaching the tamar stage before harvest. However, in humid regions or cloudy seasons, harvested dates were spread on mats, rooftops, or raised drying racks to complete the process. Workers turned the fruit periodically to ensure even drying. Fully dried dates could last months or even years without spoiling, making them invaluable as a staple food. In addition to drying, ancient societies developed techniques to produce date syrup, known in Mesopotamia as dibs or syrup. Syrup production involved crushing dates, usually low-grade or surplus fruit, mixing the pulp with water, and heating the mixture in clay or bronze vessels. The liquid was strained and boiled until it thickened into a dark, sweet concentrate. Date syrup served as a sweetener in cooking, a preservative, and a trade commodity. Its long shelf life and high caloric content made it an essential food in regions where honey and sugar were scarce. Another important byproduct was date wine, produced through natural fermentation. While grapes were preferred for winemaking in many ancient cultures, dates provided an alternative in regions where grapevines could not grow. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia and the Arabian Gulf suggests that date wine was produced as early as the Bronze Age. The process involved soaking dates in water, allowing the mixture to ferment, and storing it in sealed jars. This beverage held ritual, medicinal, and social significance. Though its consumption varied by culture, date seeds were not wasted. After cleaning and drying, seeds were often ground into coarse flour for animal feed or burned as fuel. In some cases, seeds were soaked and softened before being given to livestock. Oil extraction from seeds also occurred in certain regions, though on a small scale due to the difficulty of the process. Storage played a central role in the importance of dates as a survival food. Ancient societies developed numerous methods to preserve date harvests for extended periods. One common technique was packing dried dates into clay jars or woven baskets, sometimes lined with palm leaves to absorb moisture. The jars were sealed with clay stoppers or palm fiber lids to keep out insects and dust. Dates stored in this way could last through an entire year, sustaining communities through droughts, travel, or seasonal food shortages. In large estates or administrative centers, storage became more systematic. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia shows rooms filled with massive storage jars containing dates, syrup, or date paste. These facilities often included ventilation channels to control humidity. Some societies pressed dates into dense blocks or cakes, which were easier to transport and ration. These blocks were a regular part of workers' rations in temples, palaces, and agricultural estates. Dates also served as an important trade commodity. Their long shelf life made them ideal for transport along caravan routes. Merchants carried dates across the Arabian Peninsula, into North Africa, and along the Persian Gulf. Dried dates and date syrup were exchanged for grains, textiles, metals, and spices. In regions where food security depended heavily on dates, these products functioned both as currency and strategic reserves. Culturally, stored dates supported religious rituals, seasonal festivals, and hospitality customs. In many ancient societies, offering dates to travelers or guests symbolized generosity and welcome. Dates were frequently included in temple offerings and used in ceremonial meals, marking their spiritual as well as nutritional value. In summary, the harvesting, processing, and storage of dates were crucial elements of ancient economic and social systems. Efficient management of the date harvest provided not only food security but also trade opportunities, religious significance, and long-term stability in some of the harshest environments on Earth. The techniques developed by early growers allowed dates to become one of the most enduring and valuable fruits of ancient history. Cultural, economic, and trade significance of dates in ancient civilizations. The date palm held unparalleled importance in the cultural, economic, and social life of ancient desert societies. Its resilience, productivity, and versatility made it a cornerstone of survival, trade, and tradition. More than just a fruit tree, it became a defining symbol of prosperity in some of the world's harshest environments. This chapter explores how dates shaped ancient civilizations through economic value, cultural meaning, and long-distance trade networks. Economically, dates were one of the most reliable food sources available to ancient populations living in arid regions. A mature palm produced fruit annually for decades, and fully dried dates could be stored for years, creating a dependable reserve against famine. In regions like Mesopotamia, Arabia, and North Africa, where droughts and seasonal shortages were common, dates functioned as a form of food insurance. Temples, palaces, and estates stored vast quantities of dates and date syrup to ensure continuous supplies for workers, soldiers, and urban populations. Administrative records for Mesopotamia showed that dates were used both as a food and a form of currency. Workers on temple lands received rations of dates or date products as part of their wages. Tax lists, offering inventories, and tribute records often included dates, emphasizing their economic significance. In some periods, especially in southern Mesopotamia, dates rivaled grain as one of the most important agricultural products. Beyond their economic value, dates played a central role in cultural and religious traditions. Many ancient societies viewed the date palm as a symbol of life, fertility, and divine blessing. This symbolism stemmed from the tree's ability to flourish in environments that seemed inhospitable to most plants. In Mesopotamian mythology, the date palm appears in stories of abundance and paradise. Temple art and cylinder seals frequently depicted palm trees, indicating their spiritual resonance. In ancient Arabia, the date palm was intertwined with daily life and cultural identity. Poems and oral traditions praised the palm for sustaining tribes during long journeys and harsh seasons. Offering dates to guests became a core part of hospitality customs, a tradition that persists in many cultures today. The fruit was also included in early ritual practices, seasonal festivals, and communal gatherings. During harvest celebrations, families and entire communities worked together, reflecting the date palm's role in social cohesion. Egypt also incorporated dates into cultural and religious ceremonies. Although grapes and figs were more documented in elite symbolism, dates appeared in offerings to gods and in funerary provisions intended to support the deceased in the afterlife. The palm tree was associated with concepts of renewal and eternal life, often appearing in tomb art and temple reliefs. Date wine was consumed in certain rituals and social occasions, especially among lower classes or in regions where grape wine was less accessible. Date palms also shaped regional economies through their extensive byproducts. The fruit was only one part of the tree's value. Palm trunks were used as building material for beams, roofs, and furniture. Fronds were woven into baskets, mats, and ropes, providing essential household tools. Leaf fibers were used for brooms, fishing nets, and clothing accessories. Even the pits had value. They fed animals, fueled fires, and sometimes were ground into medicinal or cosmetic products. This full utilization gave the date palm its reputation as the tree of life, as nearly every part served a purpose. Trade significantly expanded the date palm's influence. Because dried dates were lightweight, long-lasting, and nutrient-dense, they became ideal trade goods across caravan routes and maritime networks. Merchants transported dates from the Arabian Peninsula to Mesopotamia, Persia, and the Levant, as well as across North Africa and into the Mediterranean. In return, they acquired grains, textiles, metal tools, and spices. Date syrup, another high-value product, traveled along the same routes. Often used as a sweetener in regions where honey was scarce or expensive. Coastal and river ports also facilitated trade. Ships from Dilmun, modern-day Bahrain, carried dates throughout the Persian Gulf, linking Arabia with Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. In North Africa, date products moved westward along trans-Saharan routes, contributing to the economic development of early desert trading towns. As Islam later expanded through these regions, dates retained their economic and cultural significance, further embedding themselves into trade networks. The date palm also influenced settlement patterns. Oasis, supported by date groves, became hubs for caravan travel, agriculture, and urban growth. Some of the earliest desert cities, including those in the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa, formed around large date palm oases that offered reliable food, shade, and water management systems. These oases functioned not only as agricultural centers but also as strategic points for commerce and cultural exchange. In addition to their economic and geographic importance, dates held symbolic power in art and literature. Palm motifs adorned pottery, reliefs, jewelry, and architectural elements. In Mesopotamian art, the stylized palm often appeared alongside symbols of kingship or fertility. In Arabian poetry, the palm represented resilience, generosity, and lineage. These representations reflected the tree's central role in both material and symbolic life. The enduring significance of dates in ancient civilizations can be attributed to their exceptional adaptability, diverse uses, and foundational importance in desert environments. While grapes and apples required favorable climates and fertile soils, the date palm allowed societies to flourish in regions where few other crops could be grown. Its presence transformed landscapes, supported economies, and shaped cultural values. By the end of the ancient era, the date palm stood as one of the most important cultivated trees in the Near East, Arabia, and North Africa. Its influence extended across trade routes, religious traditions, daily meals, and community structures. The innovations in pollination, irrigation, and oasis management developed by ancient farmers ensured that the date palm remained a vital and enduring part of human civilization. Thank you for watching this comprehensive look at 3 ancient fruits that shaped human civilization. Grapes, apples, and dates were more than food. They were pillars of early agriculture, trade, technology, and cultural identity. If you enjoyed this documentary, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting to support the channel. Let us know which ancient food, crop, or civilization you'd like us to explore next. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.